Neil Heslin is the father of a 6-year-old boy who was shot in Sandy Hook massacre in Newtown, Connecticut. And he went to go testify. There was a hearing that had 1,000 people in it, gun violence prevention working group at the Legislative Office building in Hartford. And he wanted to tell the story of his son. Now we're going to show you a part of that, and you're going to hear at the end gun advocates heckling him. Listen.
He was my son, he was my buddy, he was my best friend. And the worst day of my life was the day I had, when this happened and I buried him.
It shall not be infringed.
All right.
All right.
Heslin, please continue with it.
We're not living in the Wild West. We're not a third world nation. We have the strongest military in the world. We don't need to defend our homes with weapons like that.
Who heckles that guy? They were shouting Second Amendment throughout, and then you heard them on that tape saying, don't infringe on our rights. Let the guy tell the story about his son. Now look, I happen to agree with him, but if I disagreed with him, let's say he gets up and tells that emotional story about his son, but he says, look, I wish there was an armed guard there that could have stopped them. That's why I'm in favor of more guns in schools. Boy, I would massively disagree with that. But am I going to shout out in the middle of that guy's story about his 6-year-old son and how he was his best friend and heckle the guy? How often do we have to ask the question, have you no bounds of decency, man? How low can you possibly get? Part of the story is that the kid loved being a little cowboy and would ride, the false horses, the stick horses, etc. And at this funeral, the cops showed up and a line of police officers on horseback to honor him. And, the Heslins say he was a boy that loved life, lived it to its fullest. He was my son, he was my buddy, he was my best friend. He was interrupted by dozens of gun advocates throughout the speech. There are no bounds, man. If you can't let that guy say his piece without interrupting him, you have no decency. These are the guys we got to deal with. And then how do the Democrats keep yelling at us, you got to compromise, you got to compromise. The Republicans keep yelling, no compromise, no compromise. I mean, did these guys look like they're in the mood for compromise? And what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to meet these animals halfway? I mean, an animal does that.
They said he asked the crowd a question, and he waited for an answer. So they actually answered his question. When he said, give me a reason that we need to have these kinds of weapons in our society. It was something along those lines. And he goes, somebody needs to give me one reason why we need to have these. And he said, Second Amendment, Second Amendment. So they were saying they weren't interrupting, they weren't being rude. He actually goaded them into it. So some people are saying that. Again, like I said, if he's asking that question, just shut up and let him finish his point. Just don't quote answer it.
No, Jared, that's an important point you're making. Now think about this though. First of all, he's got a picture of a 6-year-old son that's been brutally murdered by guns, right? I'm not in the room. It sounds like a rhetorical question to me. Even if you took it as a literal question, if I'm in the room and the guy says, who would be against an armed guard there to protect my little 6-year-old son? I'm not going to shout and jump up like a jackass and go, oh, I would be opposed, I would be opposed. No, you'll get your chance at the microphone later. This is not the time to prove what a tough guy you are. So, JR, the context you give is important, but it doesn't justify doing that to this guy, man. Every time I see that line about how he was his buddy and his best friend, it rips me up inside, man. Look, I know a lot of good people are, advocates of guns. A lot of our audience is, and you guys get angry whenever I talk about gun control and you think I'm wrong and you care about the Second Amendment. I get all that, right? But on one thing, you are definitely wrong. And we can say, hey, you know what? That's the price of freedom. But if you're claiming that we don't have more deaths because of guns, you are deluding yourself. Chicago had 500 gun homicides last year. Japan averages 10 a year. Chicago is one American city. Japan has 125 million people in it. 10 versus 500. Who are you kidding? Of course more people get killed if there are more guns. Move on to another argument. You can make the argument, hey, you know what, that's the price we got to pay, and those are our rights, and cars kill people, and we don't outlaw them. You can make any argument you like, but please stop the nonsense about how if there are these guns that more people don't die. Oh, Chicago has tough gun control. Chicago is an island in the middle of an ocean of guns. We have nearly 300 million guns in this country. Over 10,000 gun homicides in this country. 10 in Japan, 10,000 here. We keep killing each other over and over with what? Guns.